The sun had barely climbed over the hills when Adeze stepped out onto the porch of her family's house, her arms crossed and her eyes already searching for something to complain about. It was a habit of hers, this morning ritual of checking the yard, the gate, and the road beyond it, as if she were the guardian of some grand estate, rather than a modest home on the edge of a quiet village called Umuoji. The house itself was not large, but it was clean and well kept, with whitewashed walls and a small garden of vegetables that her mother tended with care. Adayeze's father had once been a respected trader before illness slowed him down, and though the family no longer had much wealth, they still held their heads high. Perhaps too high, some might have said. Adayeze, in particular, carried herself as though she belonged to a much grander world than the one she actually lived in. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her skin was smooth and dark like polished wood, her eyes bright and quick, missing nothing. But it was her tongue that people remembered most, sharp, unforgiving. She had a way of looking at a person and deciding, within seconds, whether they were worth her time. Most were not. That morning, as she stood by the gate humming a tune to herself, she noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the main road. He was still far away, but even from a distance, she could tell he was not from the village. His steps were slow and tired, as though he had walked a very long way. As he drew closer, she saw that his clothes were torn in places, covered in dust, and hanging loosely from his frame. His sandals were worn thin, and a walking stick supported him with every step. Adayeze wrinkled her nose. Another beggar, she muttered to herself, already feeling irritation rise in her chest. Beggars were not uncommon on the road that passed through Umuoji, especially during the dry season, when travelers moved from town to town searching for work or shelter. But something about this one made her uneasy, though she could not say what. As he reached the gate, he paused, leaning slightly on his stick, and looked at her with tired but calm eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, despite his obvious exhaustion. "I have been walking since dawn. Would you be kind enough to spare a cup of water, and perhaps allow me to rest under your tree for a moment?" Adayeze did not move. She studied him from head to toe, taking in every torn seam and every layer of dust on his skin, and something in her decided, instantly and without mercy, that he was beneath her attention. "This is not a resting place for wanderers," she said, her voice cold. "If you are thirsty, there is a stream, 2 miles down the road. I suggest you continue on your way." The stranger did not argue. He simply nodded, as though he had expected such a response, and made no move to defend himself or plead his case. There was something strange about his calmness, something that did not match the way most people reacted to rejection. Most travelers, when refused, would beg a little more, or grumble, or curse under their breath as they left. This man did none of that. He simply straightened his back, adjusted the strap of the worn bag on his shoulder, and turned to walk away. But Adayeze, feeling emboldened by his silence, could not resist adding one more remark. "And do not think of coming back this way either," she called after him. "We do not need ragged strangers loitering near our home. People might think we associate with beggars." The man paused for just a moment, his back still turned to her. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though he might respond. But then he simply continued walking, his steps slow but steady, until he disappeared around the bend, where the road curved past the old baobab tree. Adayeze watched him go, feeling a strange satisfaction, the kind that comes from believing one has protected their home from something unwanted. She turned back toward the house, humming her tune once more, already forgetting the encounter, as though it were nothing more than brushing away a fly. Inside, her mother, Neka, was preparing breakfast, the smell of fried plantains filling the small kitchen. She looked up as Adayeze entered. "Who were you speaking to outside?" Neka asked, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "No one important," Adayeze replied, waving her hand dismissively. "Just some ragged traveler asking for water. I sent him away." Neka frowned slightly, setting down the pan she was holding. "You should be careful how you treat strangers, my daughter. You never know who they might be, or what troubles they carry. A little kindness costs nothing." Adayeze rolled her eyes, a habit she had picked up in her teenage years and never quite grown out of. "Mother, if I gave water to every dusty traveler who walked past our gate, we would have no water left for ourselves. Besides, look at the state of him. Torn clothes, dirty feet, No proper bag to carry his things. A man like that has clearly made poor choices in his life. I owe him nothing. You do not know his story, Neka said gently, though there was a firmness in her voice that suggested she disapproved of her daughter's harshness. Appearances can be deceiving. Your father was not born wealthy either, remember. He worked with his hands and walked many dusty roads before he built what we have now. That is different, Adeyeze said quickly. Father worked hard. That man looked like he had simply given up. Neka said nothing more, though the look on her face suggested she was not entirely convinced by her daughter's judgment. She returned to her cooking, and Adeyeze, eager to change the subject, went to help her younger brother, Chidi, prepare for school. As the day went on, the memory of the stranger faded into the background of Adeyeze's mind, buried beneath the usual tasks of the household, fetching water, helping with chores, and gossiping with her friends in the village square later that afternoon. It was there, among her friends, that she first heard whispers of something unusual. Have you heard? Asked Ifeoma, one of Adeyeze's closest friends, her eyes wide with the excitement of fresh gossip. There is a strange man walking through the village. He does not ask for money like the other beggars. He only asks questions. What kind of questions? Adeyeze asked, only half interested, still fanning herself in the afternoon heat. Strange ones, Ifeoma continued. He asked old Papa Ise about the chief's fairness in settling disputes. He asked Mama Uju about how the market traders treat the poor. It is as if he is testing us, trying to learn something about our village. Adeyeze laughed lightly, though something about the description nagged at the back of her mind. Perhaps he is simply mad. Wandering the roads with no proper clothing does strange things to a man's mind. Ifeoma shrugged. Maybe, but Papa Ise said something odd. He said the man's eyes did not match his clothes. He said despite the rags, there was something in the way he carried himself, something almost noble. Adeyeze waved her hand, dismissing the idea entirely. You are letting your imagination run wild, Ifeoma. A ragged man cannot be noble. Nobility is not something you can hide under torn cloth and dust. If he were truly someone of importance, he would not be walking around looking like a beggar. Her friends laughed along with her, and the conversation soon moved to other topics, an upcoming wedding in the village, new clothes arriving at the market, and other light-hearted matters. But that night, as Adeyeze lay on her mat staring at the ceiling, she found herself thinking, unwillingly, about the stranger's calm eyes and steady voice. There had been something in the way he looked at her, not anger, not resentment, but a quiet understanding, as though he had expected her cruelty and had already forgiven it before she even spoke it. She shook the thought away, telling herself it meant nothing. He was simply a beggar, and beggars were used to being turned away. That was the way of the world, and she had done nothing wrong by protecting her family's peace and reputation. The next morning, Adeyeze woke earlier than usual, disturbed by a dream she could not quite remember, though it left her with an uneasy feeling in her chest. She went about her usual chores, sweeping the front yard and helping her mother prepare the morning meal, trying to push aside the strange restlessness that had settled over her. As she swept near the gate, she glanced up instinctively toward the road, half expecting, though she would never admit it, to see the ragged stranger again. But the road was empty, save for a few chickens pecking at the dirt and a neighbor's goat wandering lazily along the path. She told herself she was relieved. Later that day, while fetching water from the village well, she overheard two elderly women speaking in hushed tones near the market stalls. They say he has been asking about the young widow's land dispute, one woman said, glancing around as though sharing a secret, and about the chief's decision regarding the disputed harvest last season. Who would send a beggar to ask such things? The other woman replied, shaking her head, unless he is not truly a beggar at all. Adeyeze paused, her water pot balanced on her hip, listening more closely now despite herself. What do you mean? The first woman asked. I mean, the second woman said, lowering her voice further, that sometimes those with great power choose to walk among the common people in disguise, to see the truth of how things really are. My grandmother used to tell stories of a king who did such things, generations ago. The first woman laughed, though not entirely convinced. You believe an old ragged man walking through Umuoji could be royalty? That is the stuff of old stories, not real life. Perhaps, the second woman said with a shrug, but stranger things have happened. Adaize quickly filled her pot and hurried away, telling herself the conversation was nothing more than village superstition, the kind of talk old women enjoyed to pass the time. Yet as she walked home, the words lingered in her mind, refusing to fade as easily as she wished. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Adaize remained quieter than usual, picking at her food while her thoughts wandered back to the stranger's calm expression, his patient silence in the face of her harsh words, and the strange questions he had reportedly been asking throughout the village. "You are unusually quiet tonight," her father, Obiora, remarked, watching his daughter with mild curiosity. Though weakened by illness, his eyes remained sharp, missing little of what happened in his household. "I am simply tired, father," Adaz replied, forcing a small smile. Obiora studied her for a moment longer, before returning to his meal, though a knowing look passed briefly across his face, as though he suspected there was more to his daughter's silence than mere tiredness. Later that night, as the household settled into sleep, Adaize lay awake once more, staring at the darkened ceiling above her mat. She told herself repeatedly that the stranger meant nothing, that he was simply a wandering beggar with unusual habits, and that the village gossip was nothing more than idle talk meant to fill empty afternoons. But deep within her, a small and unfamiliar feeling had begun to stir, a flicker of doubt, faint but persistent, whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been too quick to judge a man based solely on the state of his clothing and the dust upon his skin. She turned onto her side, closing her eyes tightly, determined to banish the thought from her mind. Tomorrow would bring new chores, new conversations, and surely, she told herself, the strange traveler would move on from Umuoji entirely, becoming nothing more than a forgotten memory, a brief and unremarkable encounter at her family's gate. Yet even as sleep finally claimed her, a small, nagging voice at the back of her mind refused to be silenced entirely, whispering that this was not, in fact, the end of the story, but merely its quiet and unassuming beginning. Far beyond the borders of Umuoji, in a grand city whose towers rose above wide paved streets, there stood a palace, known throughout the region for its beauty and strength. This was the seat of the Duke's family, a place of marble floors, tall windows, and gardens that stretched for acres, filled with flowers that bloomed in every season. It was here, 3 days before the stranger appeared at Adaize's gate, that a young man named Alaric had made a decision that would change the course of his life, if only for a season. Alaric was not an ordinary young man. He was the son of Duke Renshaw, ruler of a vast territory that included Umuoji and dozens of other villages and towns scattered across the region. As the only son and heir, Alaric was expected to one day take his father's place, to govern the land, settle disputes, collect taxes, and ensure the peace and prosperity of all who lived under his family's protection. It was a heavy responsibility, one that weighed on him more with each passing year. But Alaric had a problem, one that troubled him deeply as he grew older. He did not know his people, not truly. He had grown up within the palace walls, surrounded by servants who bowed to him, advisors who flattered him, and nobles who sought his favor. Whenever he traveled through the villages under his family's rule, he did so in grand carriages, surrounded by guards, greeted by officials who had been warned days in advance of his arrival. Everywhere he went, people showed him their best selves, their kindest smiles, their most generous words. But Alaric suspected, and rightly so, that this was not how they behaved when no one of importance was watching. "How can I govern fairly?" he had once asked his father, "if I never see how my people truly live, or how they treat one another when they believe no one of consequence is present?" Duke Renshaw, a wise and aging man who had ruled for many decades, had simply smiled at his son's question, remembering perhaps a similar question he himself had once asked his own father many years before. "There is an old tradition in our family," Renshaw had said one evening, as they sat together in the palace library, surrounded by shelves of ancient books and scrolls. Long before either of us were born, it was the custom for the heir of this house to walk among the common people in disguise before taking the throne. Not as a duke, not as a nobleman, but as a common traveler, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the truth of his own character to guide him. Alaric had leaned forward with interest, his curiosity fully awakened. Why was this tradition abandoned? "Because it is not an easy thing," his father had replied, his voice heavy with memory. to walk without protection, without comfort, without the respect that comes from a title. Many of your ancestors found it too difficult, too humbling, and so the tradition slowly faded over the generations. But I have always believed it was a valuable practice, one that taught humility and wisdom in equal measure. I wish to do it, Alaric had said immediately, without hesitation. I wish to walk among the people as one of them, to see the truth of how they live, and to learn whether the reports of fairness and prosperity in our villages are as accurate as my advisors claim. His father had studied him carefully for a long moment before nodding slowly. Very well, my son. But understand this. If you choose this path, you must commit to it fully. No guards will follow you in secret. No advisors will watch over you from a distance. You will walk as a common man, vulnerable to the same hardships and cruelties that any traveler might face. Only then will you learn the truth. And so, with his father's blessing, Alaric had prepared for his journey. He gave his fine clothing to a trusted servant for safekeeping, dressed himself in the simplest and most worn garments he could find, and set out from the palace on foot, carrying only a small bag of essential supplies and a walking stick to aid him on the long roads ahead. His plan was simple, though not without purpose. He would travel through several of the villages under his family's rule, observing how people treated strangers, how the local leaders governed their communities, and whether the reports of peace and fairness that reached the palace were truly accurate. He would ask questions when appropriate, listen carefully to conversations, and take note of anything that seemed unjust or troubling. Only after completing this journey would he return to the palace, resume his identity as the future duke, and use what he had learned to govern more wisely. There was, however, another reason for his journey, one that Alaric kept mostly to himself, sharing it only briefly with his father before departing. I also wish to find a wife, he had admitted, somewhat awkwardly, as his father helped him adjust the worn bag on his shoulder. But not in the way such matters are usually arranged, through political alliances and careful negotiations between noble families. I wish to find someone who will treat me with kindness and respect, not because of my title, but because of my character. Someone who will show compassion to a stranger, simply because it is the right thing to do, without knowing whether that stranger might reward her generosity. His father had smiled at this, a rare softness appearing in his weathered face. That is a wise wish, my son. Many marriages in our family have been built on politics and wealth, and few of them brought true happiness. If you can find someone who loves you for who you are, rather than what you might become, you will be fortunate indeed. And so, with this dual purpose in mind, Alaric had set out from the palace, leaving behind the comforts and protections of his noble life, to walk the dusty roads as a common traveler. His journey had taken him through several small towns before he arrived at Umuoji, and in each place, he had observed a mixture of kindness and cruelty among the people he encountered. In one village, an elderly widow had shared her meager meal with him without hesitation, despite having little food for herself. In another, a group of young men had mocked his appearance and thrown small stones at his feet, laughing as he hurried away. These experiences, both kind and cruel, had taught him much about the true nature of the people living under his family's protection, far more than any report from his advisors ever could. By the time he reached Umuoji, Alaric was genuinely exhausted, both from the physical strain of walking such long distances, and from the emotional weight of witnessing so much of human nature, both good and bad, in such a short time. It was in this state of true and unpretended weariness that he had approached Adaize's gate, hoping simply for a moment's rest and a cup of water to ease his parched throat. Her harsh words had stung more than she could have known, though not for the reasons she might have imagined. It was not wounded pride that troubled him, for he had experienced far worse treatment in his travels. Rather, it was the casual cruelty of her tone, the ease with which she dismissed him without a second thought, that left him thoughtful as he continued down the road toward the village center. He had expected such treatment, of course. His father had warned him that many people, when they believed themselves speaking to someone of no importance, revealed their true character, for better or worse. Adaize's reaction was not unique among those he had encountered on his journey, but there was something in her sharp words, something in the confident certainty with which she had judged him, that lingered in his mind longer than similar encounters with others. Perhaps, he thought as he walked, it was because she was young and clearly intelligent, her words quick and cutting rather than simply thoughtless. Or perhaps it was the flicker of something else he had glimpsed briefly in her eyes, something that suggested her harshness was not entirely without complexity, a mixture of pride and, perhaps, fear of appearing weak or foolish in front of others. Whatever the reason, Alaric found himself thinking of the young woman at the gate, even as he continued his observations throughout Umuoji, speaking with various villagers about the local chief's governance, the fairness of recent land disputes, and the general treatment of the poor and vulnerable within the community. He learned much in his days within the village. He discovered that the local chief, while not corrupt, was somewhat lazy in resolving disputes quickly, often allowing conflicts to linger far longer than necessary. He learned that the market traders, for the most part, treated customers fairly, though a few were known to take advantage of travelers unfamiliar with local prices. He heard stories of generosity, such as the widow who regularly shared food with orphan children in the village, and stories of unkindness, such as a wealthy landowner who had recently threatened to seize the property of a struggling family over a small debt. This last story caught Alaric's attention particularly, for it reminded him of his father's teachings about the responsibilities of those in power to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. He made careful mental notes of the landowner's name and the details of the situation, intending to investigate further before his journey concluded. As the days passed, Alaric continued to observe and learn, careful to maintain his humble disguise and avoid revealing his true identity to anyone in the village. This was not always easy, for there were moments when villagers, sensing something unusual about his manner of speech or his careful, measured questions, looked at him with suspicion or curiosity that made him uneasy. One such moment occurred when he spoke with an elderly man named Papa Eze, a respected elder within the village, known for his wisdom and sharp observation skills. As they sat together beneath a large tree near the village square, discussing the recent land dispute involving the young widow, Papa Eze had studied Alaric with unusual intensity. "You ask questions like a man who has studied law," the old man had remarked, his eyes narrowing slightly with curiosity. "Not like a simple traveler passing through our village." Alaric had smiled carefully, choosing his words with practiced caution. "I have had the fortune of some education in my youth, though circumstances have since led me to a simpler life." Papa Eze had nodded slowly, though the look in his eyes suggested he was not entirely convinced by this explanation. "There is something about you, young man, that does not quite match your appearance. I have lived many years and met many travelers, but few carry themselves with such quiet confidence, despite such humble clothing." Alaric had quickly changed the subject, steering their conversation back toward the details of the land dispute. But the old man's words stayed with him, a reminder that his disguise, however carefully maintained, was not entirely impenetrable to those with sharp enough eyes. It was this same sharpness, perhaps, that had led to the whispers now spreading throughout the village, whispers that Adeyeze herself had begun to hear among her friends and neighbors. Alaric was unaware of the full extent of these rumors, though he suspected that his careful questions and unusual manner had likely drawn more attention than he originally intended. Despite this growing risk of discovery, Alaric found himself reluctant to leave Umuoji as quickly as he had originally planned. Part of this reluctance stemmed from his genuine interest in resolving the situation involving the threatened family and the wealthy landowner, a matter he now felt a strong sense of responsibility to address, even in his disguised state. But another part of his reluctance, one he was hesitant to fully acknowledge even to himself, stemmed from a lingering curiosity about the sharp-tongued young woman who had so coldly dismissed him at her gate. He found himself wondering, during quiet moments, as he rested beneath shady trees or walked along dusty paths, whether her harshness stemmed purely from pride, or whether there was some deeper vulnerability hidden beneath her confident exterior. He wondered whether she would react differently if she encountered him again, now that rumors of a mysterious traveler had begun circulating throughout the village. These thoughts, though persistent, did not distract him entirely from his purpose. He continued his careful observations throughout Umuoji, gathering information about the community's governance, its treatment of the vulnerable, and the general character of its residents. He spoke with market traders, farmers, widows, and children, each conversation adding another piece to the growing picture he was forming of this particular village under his family's rule. Yet even as he gathered this valuable information, Alaric could not fully shake the memory of Adeze's cold dismissal at her gate. nor the strange, persistent curiosity it had sparked within him regarding the true nature of her character, hidden as it likely was beneath layers of pride and quick judgment. As evening fell on his third day within Umuoji, Alaric found himself walking slowly along the very road that had first led him past Adeze's gate. He paused briefly near the bend by the old baobab tree, looking back toward the modest house in the distance, its whitewashed walls now tinted golden by the setting sun. He wondered, not for the first time, what circumstances had shaped such sharpness within someone so young. He wondered whether pride alone explained her harsh words, or whether fear, insecurity, or some other hidden struggle contributed to her quick and unkind judgment of strangers. Whatever the answer, Alaric found himself increasingly certain that his journey through Umuoji was far from finished, and that his path would likely cross once more with the sharp-tongued young woman who had so confidently turned him away from her gate, unaware of the truth hidden beneath his ragged and dusty disguise. The morning after Ifeoma had shared her whispers about the mysterious stranger, Adayeze woke to find the village unusually alive with chatter. She noticed it the moment she stepped out to fetch water, sensing an energy in the air that was different from the usual quiet rhythm of daily life in Umuoji. Small groups of women stood near the well, speaking in hushed but excited tones, while children ran between houses, carrying bits of gossip like prizes to be shared. "Did you hear what happened at the market yesterday?" one woman asked another, as Adeze approached the well, her water pot balanced carefully on her hip. "Tell me," the second woman urged, leaning in closer. "The strange traveler, the one with the torn clothes, he was seen speaking with Mama Uju for nearly an hour. And do you know what he asked her?" "What?" "He asked her about the fairness of the prices at the market, and whether traders ever cheated poor customers who could not count their change properly. Mama Uju said his questions were so precise, so thoughtful, that she almost forgot he was dressed like a beggar." Adeze paused near the group, pretending to focus on filling her water pot, while secretly listening to every word. She told herself she was not truly interested, that this was merely idle village gossip meant to fill empty mornings. Yet despite her efforts to appear indifferent, she found herself leaning slightly closer, straining to catch every detail of the conversation. "And that is not all," the first woman continued, her voice dropping even lower, as though sharing a great secret. "He was also seen near the chief's compound yesterday evening, speaking with one of the guards. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but the guard later told his wife that the stranger asked questions no ordinary traveler would think to ask. Questions about how disputes are settled and whether the chief ever favors the wealthy over the poor." Adayeze's curiosity, despite her best efforts to suppress it, grew sharper with every word. She finished filling her water pot and turned to leave, telling herself firmly that she had heard enough foolish talk for one morning. Yet as she walked home, her mind returned again and again to the strange traveler's questions, wondering what kind of person, ragged and dusty as he appeared, would concern himself with such matters of fairness and justice within a village that was not his own. By midday, the whispers had grown louder and more elaborate, spreading from household to household like ripples across a still pond. Adeze heard several different versions of the same basic story, each slightly embellished by the imagination of whoever was telling it. In one version, the stranger was said to be a scholar who had lost his fortune through misfortune and now wandered from village to village, seeking wisdom among common people. In another version, he was described as a former soldier, haunted by memories of war, who had chosen to live simply after witnessing great suffering. Yet another version, whispered mostly among the older women, suggested something far more intriguing, something that made Adeze's skin prickle with unease each time she heard it repeated. "My grandmother used to speak of such things," old Mama Chica told a small gathering of women near the market stalls, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to sharing ancient wisdom. In her time, it was known that certain powerful men, dukes and lords from distant cities, would sometimes disguise themselves as common travelers to walk among their people unseen. They wished to learn the truth of how their subjects lived, and whether those entrusted with governing them ruled fairly or unjustly. "Surely you do not believe such old stories still happen today," one younger woman replied, though there was uncertainty rather than confidence in her voice. "I believe stranger things have happened," Mama Chica said simply, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And I have lived long enough to know that appearances often deceive us more than we realize. This traveler's eyes, when I passed him near the stream yesterday, held none of the desperation or hunger I have seen in true beggars over my many years. There was calm in his gaze, and something almost like quiet authority, hidden carefully beneath his humble appearance. Adayeze, who had been standing nearby pretending to examine some vegetables at a market stall, found herself unable to ignore this conversation entirely. She turned slightly, catching Mama Chica's eye for just a moment, and the old woman offered her a knowing smile, as though she somehow sensed the younger woman's growing unease. "You look troubled, child," Mama Chica said, addressing Adayeze directly now. "Have you perhaps encountered this mysterious traveler yourself?" Adayeze hesitated, feeling heat rise to her cheeks, despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I saw him briefly at our gate yesterday morning," she admitted reluctantly. "He asked for water and a place to rest, but I sent him away." A murmur passed through the small gathering of women, and Mama Chica's expression shifted into something between curiosity and gentle concern. "And how did you speak to him, child?" the old woman asked carefully. Adayeze felt a flicker of defensiveness rise within her, though beneath it, an uncomfortable seed of doubt had begun to take root. "I spoke to him as I would speak to any wandering beggar," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady and confident. "Politely enough, though firmly. We cannot allow every ragged traveler to rest at our gate, or soon our home would become a resting place for every wanderer along the road." Mama Chica studied her for a long moment, saying nothing at first, though her silence carried more weight than words might have. Finally she spoke, her voice gentle but carrying an unmistakable note of caution. "Kindness costs us little, child, yet its absence can cost us much more than we realize. I will say only this, and then I will leave you to consider it as you wish. If even a small part of these whispers proves true, and this traveler is indeed someone of greater importance than his appearance suggests, I would not wish to have spoken to him as harshly as you describe." With that, Mama Chica turned back to her conversation with the other women, leaving Adayeze standing alone near the market stall, her earlier confidence considerably shaken by the old woman's quiet warning. She walked home slowly that afternoon, her mind heavy with troubled thoughts. She told herself repeatedly that the village gossip was nothing more than foolish imagination, that ragged strangers were simply ragged strangers, regardless of how calm their eyes appeared, or how thoughtful their questions might be. Yet despite her efforts to dismiss these thoughts entirely, a persistent uncertainty had settled deep within her, refusing to be easily ignored. That evening, as her family gathered for dinner, Adayeze remained unusually quiet once more, picking at her food while her mind wandered back repeatedly to the strange traveler and the growing whispers surrounding his true identity. "You have been distracted these past 2 days," her mother, Eneka, observed, watching her daughter with quiet concern. "Is something troubling you, my daughter?" Adayeze hesitated before answering, uncertain how much to reveal of her growing unease. "There has been strange talk in the village," she finally admitted, "about a traveler who passed through recently, asking unusual questions of the villagers." Her younger brother, Chidi, looked up from his meal with sudden interest. "Do you mean the ragged man everyone has been talking about? My friends say he might be a spy, sent by a rival lord to gather secrets about our village." "Do not be foolish," Adayeze said quickly, though her tone lacked its usual confidence. "That is simply children's imagination running wild." "Perhaps," their father, Obiora, interjected thoughtfully, setting down his spoon and studying his children carefully. "Yet there is often truth hidden within even the wildest rumors, if one knows how to look for it. In my years as a trader, I encountered many travelers whose true identities differed greatly from their outward appearances. Wealth and status can be hidden as easily as poverty can be pretended, depending on a person's purpose for disguising themselves." Adayeze looked at her father curiously, sensing wisdom hidden within his simple observation. "Do you believe this traveler could truly be someone of importance, father?" Obiora considered the question carefully before responding. "I cannot say for certain, my daughter, but I have learned throughout my life that it is wiser to treat every stranger with basic respect and kindness, regardless of their outward appearance. You never truly know who stands before you, nor what consequences your actions today might bring upon you tomorrow." His words settled uncomfortably within Adayeze's chest, stirring memories of her own harsh treatment of the ragged stranger at their gate. She thought again of his calm eyes, his steady voice, despite obvious exhaustion, and the quiet dignity with which he had accepted her cruel dismissal without protest or complaint. Later that night, unable to sleep, Adize rose quietly from her mat and stepped outside into the cool evening air, hoping the quiet darkness might help settle her restless thoughts. She walked slowly toward the gate, staring out at the empty road illuminated faintly by moonlight, remembering the moment the stranger had first appeared, dusty and tired, asking simply for water and rest. She wondered, standing there alone in the darkness, what kind of man he truly was. Was he simply an unfortunate traveler, as she had originally assumed? Or was there truth hidden within the village whispers, truth that suggested he was someone far greater than his ragged appearance suggested? As these thoughts swirled within her mind, Adize became aware of approaching footsteps along the road, quiet but distinct in the still night air. She stiffened slightly, peering into the darkness, and soon recognized the outline of a familiar figure approaching slowly, leaning on a walking stick much like the one the stranger had carried. Her heart quickened unexpectedly as the figure drew closer, and she realized, with a mixture of surprise and unease, that it was indeed the same ragged traveler she had so harshly dismissed just 2 days earlier. He paused near the gate, seemingly unaware at first of her presence, standing quietly in the shadows nearby. He looked tired still, though perhaps slightly less exhausted than during their first encounter, his eyes reflecting faint moonlight as he glanced briefly toward the house, before continuing slowly along the road. Adize remained frozen, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent, her earlier confidence and sharp tongue strangely absent in this quiet moment. Part of her wished to apologize immediately for her earlier harshness, while another part, still clinging stubbornly to pride, urged her to remain silent and allow him to pass without acknowledgement. Before she could decide clearly, the stranger paused once more, turning his head slightly, as though sensing her presence nearby. Their eyes met briefly across the moonlit distance, and for a fleeting moment, Adize felt an unusual chill pass through her, a strange recognition of something significant hidden beneath his humble appearance. Neither spoke. After a moment, the stranger simply nodded once, respectfully, before continuing quietly along the road, his footsteps fading gradually into the stillness of the night. Adize remained standing near the gate long after he had disappeared from sight, her mind racing with unanswered questions and growing uncertainty. She realized, with uncomfortable clarity, that her earlier judgment of him had been hasty, perhaps even unfair, and that the whispers spreading throughout the village might carry more truth than she had initially been willing to accept. As she finally returned to her sleeping mat that night, Adize found herself unable to shake the memory of the stranger's calm, knowing gaze, nor the uncomfortable realization that she might soon be forced to confront the consequences of her earlier cruelty, whether she was ready to do so or not. The days following that quiet moonlit encounter felt strange to Adize, as though the world around her had shifted slightly, though nothing visible had truly changed. She continued her usual chores, fetched water from the well each morning, and helped her mother prepare meals. Yet an unfamiliar restlessness followed her throughout each task, a persistent awareness that something significant had begun to unfold within her small village, something she did not yet fully understand. 3 days after the whispered gossip had first reached her ears, Adize found herself walking alone toward the market to purchase spices for her mother's evening meal. The afternoon sun hung high overhead, casting sharp shadows along the dusty path, and the usual sounds of village life surrounded her: chickens clucking near small homes, children laughing as they played simple games with sticks and stones, and the distant chatter of women exchanging news near their doorways. As she approached the narrower section of the path that led toward the market square, a section lined with tall grass and a few scattered trees, Adize noticed a group of 3 young men gathered near the roadside, their loud voices carrying an unpleasant edge that immediately put her on alert. She recognized them as Obina and his 2 companions, young men known throughout the village for their troublesome behavior and their tendency to bully those weaker or more vulnerable than themselves. As she drew closer, attempting to walk past them quickly without drawing attention, Adize realized with growing unease that their focus was directed at someone else entirely, an elderly man who appeared to be struggling to carry a heavy sack of grain along the path. The old man, whom Adize recognized as Papa Emeka, a quiet widower who lived alone at the edge of the village, seemed to be having considerable difficulty managing the weight of his burden. his steps slow and unsteady. "Look at this old fool," Obina said loudly, his voice carrying easily across the quiet path. "Can you not carry your own grain, old man? Perhaps you should simply give up and let the sack roll into the ditch." His companions laughed cruelly, clearly enjoying the old man's obvious distress. Papa Emeka said nothing, his face tight with the strain of both physical effort and quiet humiliation, though he continued struggling forward, apparently determined not to give the young men the satisfaction of a response. Adeze felt a familiar flash of irritation at the young men's cruelty, though she hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene directly or simply continue on her way, as she typically would have done in the past. Before she could decide, however, Obina's foot shot out suddenly, catching the edge of the old man's sack and causing it to tumble from his grip entirely, spilling grain across the dusty path. The young men erupted into fresh laughter as Papa Emeka struggled to gather the scattered grain, his hands trembling slightly, with a mixture of frustration and quiet shame. Adeze felt something shift within her chest, an unexpected surge of anger at the unfairness of the scene before her, though her feet remained rooted to the spot, uncertain how to proceed against three young men known for their aggressive tempers. It was at this moment that a familiar figure emerged from a narrow path between two houses, walking with calm, measured steps toward the commotion. Adeze's breath caught slightly as she recognized the ragged traveler, his humble clothing unchanged, though his posture seemed somehow more composed than during their previous encounters. "That is quite enough," the stranger said firmly, though his voice remained calm and steady, carrying an unmistakable authority despite his humble appearance. "This man has done nothing to deserve such treatment. I suggest you help him gather his grain immediately, and then continue on your way peacefully." Obina turned toward the stranger, his expression shifting quickly from amusement to irritation at being challenged so directly. "And who are you to give us orders, ragged beggar? This is not your concern." "It becomes my concern," the stranger replied evenly, "whenever I witness cruelty inflicted upon someone unable to defend themselves properly. I ask you again, kindly, to help this man gather his grain." Obina's companions exchanged uncertain glances, clearly less confident than their leader in confronting the stranger directly, though Obina himself seemed determined not to back down in front of his friends. "Perhaps you would like to learn some manners yourself," Obina said threateningly, stepping closer to the stranger with clenched fists. Adeze felt her heart racing, uncertain what might happen next, though something within her, an unfamiliar protective instinct, urged her forward, despite her usual reluctance to involve herself in such confrontations. "Obina," she called out sharply, stepping forward from where she had been standing frozen nearby. "Leave him be. Papa Emeka has done nothing to deserve this treatment, and neither has this traveler for speaking the truth." Obina turned toward her, clearly surprised by her sudden intervention. "This is not your concern either, Adeze. Perhaps you should mind your own affairs." "It becomes everyone's concern," Adeze replied, her voice growing steadier with each word. "When three grown men find amusement in tormenting an old widower, simply because he struggles beneath a heavy burden, have you no shame?" Her unexpected boldness seemed to shift something within the tense atmosphere, and Obina's companions shifted uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering their earlier amusement now that others had begun witnessing their behavior. Several nearby villagers, drawn by the commotion, had begun gathering nearby, watching the confrontation with growing interest. Recognizing that the situation had shifted against him, Obina scowled deeply, though he finally stepped back, gesturing reluctantly for his companions to help gather the scattered grain. "This is not finished," he muttered darkly, though he made no further move toward confrontation. As the young men reluctantly gathered the spilled grain and returned it to Papa Emeka's sack, the stranger moved quietly to assist the elderly man, lifting the now refilled sack carefully onto the old man's shoulder, taking care to ensure it was properly balanced. "Thank you, young man," Papa Emeka said quietly, his voice trembling slightly with gratitude and lingering embarrassment. "Few would have intervened so directly on behalf of an old fool like myself." "You are no fool," the stranger replied gently. "You are simply a man carrying a heavy burden, deserving of respect and assistance rather than cruelty." As Papa Emeka shuffled away, considerably relieved, the small crowd of onlookers began to disperse, the excitement of the confrontation fading quickly into ordinary afternoon activities. Adeze remained standing nearby, watching the stranger with a strange mixture of curiosity and lingering embarrassment, uncertain how to address him after her earlier harshness at the gate. The stranger turned toward her, his expression calm but curious. "That was a brave thing you did," he said quietly. "Not many would risk confrontation with young men known for their temper, simply to defend an old man's dignity." Adaize felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncertain how to respond appropriately. "I could hardly stand by and watch such cruelty," she said finally, her voice quieter and less confident than her usual sharp tone. "Though I confess, I did not expect to find you here again." "The roads often lead us back to unexpected places," the stranger replied simply, offering no further explanation. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, and Adaize found herself struggling internally between her natural pride and a growing awareness that she owed this man some measure of acknowledgement, if not outright apology, for her earlier harsh treatment at her family's gate. She began hesitantly, unsure exactly how to phrase her thoughts. "I fear I may have judged you unfairly when we first met." The stranger studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Judgment based on appearance is common enough," he said finally, his tone neither accusing nor forgiving, simply matter of fact, though it is not always accurate, nor always fair. Adaize felt an unfamiliar sting of shame at his measured response, recognizing that he had neither excused nor condemned her earlier behavior, but had instead offered a simple truth that left her to draw her own conclusions. "I hope," she said carefully, struggling against her pride, "that you did not think too poorly of our village, based on my behavior alone." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of the stranger's mouth. "I have encountered both kindness and cruelty in equal measure throughout my travels," he replied. "Your village, much like any other, contains both. I judge neither too harshly nor too favorably, based on a single encounter." His words, though gentle, carried an unmistakable wisdom that left Adaize feeling strangely humbled. She found herself wanting to continue their conversation, to learn more about this quiet, thoughtful traveler, whose calm demeanor concealed depths she was only beginning to appreciate. Yet before she could think of an appropriate way to extend their conversation further, the stranger inclined his head politely. "I must continue on my way," he said. "There are matters I must attend to before evening falls." "Of course," Adaize replied quickly, feeling an unexpected reluctance at his departure. "Thank you again for your assistance with Papa Emeka." The stranger nodded once more, before turning to walk away, his steps steady, despite his continued humble appearance. Adaize watched him go, her earlier pride now tangled uncomfortably with newfound curiosity, and a reluctant admiration she had not expected to feel toward a man she had so harshly dismissed just days earlier. As she continued toward the market, her mind remained occupied with thoughts of the stranger's calm strength and quiet wisdom, so at odds with his humble, ragged appearance. She wondered again about the whispers circulating throughout the village, wondering whether there truly was more to this traveler than met the eye. Later that evening, as she returned home with the spices her mother had requested, Adaize found herself recounting the day's events quietly to Eneka, describing the confrontation with Obina and his companions, and the stranger's calm intervention on behalf of Papa Emeka. Her mother listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "It seems this traveler possesses more courage and wisdom than his appearance might suggest," Neka observed. "Perhaps there is truth to the village whispers after all." Adaize nodded slowly, her earlier certainty about the stranger's insignificance now thoroughly shaken. "I confess, Mother, I do not know what to think anymore. He carries himself with such quiet dignity, despite his ragged clothing. It is confusing." Neka smiled gently at her daughter's evident confusion. "Perhaps, my daughter, this is simply life's way of teaching us that true worth cannot always be judged by outward appearances alone. It seems this lesson has finally begun to take root within your heart, even if only slightly." Adaize said nothing further, though her mother's words lingered thoughtfully within her mind as she prepared for bed that evening. She found herself once again unable to sleep easily, her thoughts returning repeatedly to the stranger's calm eyes, his quiet strength, and the uncomfortable realization that her earlier judgment of him had been hasty and unfair. As she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Adaize could not shake the growing certainty that her path was destined to cross again with this mysterious traveler, and that each encounter seemed to peel away another layer of her earlier pride, revealing uncomfortable truths she was only beginning to confront within herself. The trouble began on a quiet Tuesday morning, when a loud knock at the gate disturbed the peaceful rhythm of the household's usual routine. Adaeze, who had been helping her mother sort dried beans in the kitchen, looked up in surprise as her father's voice, unusually tense, carried in from the front yard. She hurried outside, wiping her hands on her wrapper, and found her father standing near the gate, speaking with a well-dressed man she did not recognize. The stranger's fine clothing and confident posture immediately marked him as someone of considerable wealth, a stark contrast to the ragged traveler who had visited their gate just days before. Behind him stood two younger men, clearly servants or assistants, carrying a small wooden chest between them. "Chief Okonkwo," her father said, his voice carrying a forced politeness that did little to hide his obvious discomfort. "I was not expecting your visit today." "Obiora," the wealthy man replied, his tone smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I believe you are aware of why I have come. The debt your family owes has now been outstanding for nearly 6 months. I have been patient, but my patience grows thin." Adaeze felt her stomach tighten with sudden anxiety. She had known, vaguely, that her family faced some financial difficulties since her father's illness had prevented him from continuing his trading work as actively as before, but she had not realized the situation had grown so serious. "I understand your concern," Obiora replied carefully, "and I assure you, I intend to repay every portion of what is owed. I simply require a little more time to gather the necessary funds." Chief Okonkwo's expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained deceptively calm. "Time is not something I can offer indefinitely, Obiora. I have already extended considerable patience, given our long acquaintance. However, business is business, and I cannot allow personal sentiment to interfere with proper financial arrangements." "What exactly are you proposing?" Obiora asked, his voice tightening with barely controlled tension. "I propose a solution that benefits us both," Chief Okonkwo said, his gaze shifting deliberately toward Adaeze, who stood nearby watching the exchange with growing unease. "I have long admired your daughter's beauty and spirit. If she were to become my third wife, I would consider your family's debt entirely forgiven, and I would additionally provide generous support to help your family recover from these difficult times." Adaeze felt a cold shock pass through her entire body at this unexpected proposal. Chief Okonkwo was easily twice her age, already married to 2 other women, and known throughout the region for his stern temperament and rigid expectations regarding obedience from those beneath him. The thought of becoming his third wife, sacrificed essentially to settle her family's financial troubles, filled her with immediate and profound dread. "Father," she said quickly, unable to contain her alarm, "surely there must be another solution." Chief Okonkwo's eyes narrowed slightly at her interruption, clearly displeased by her boldness in speaking without invitation. "Your daughter would benefit greatly from learning proper respect and obedience," he remarked coolly to Obiora. "Perhaps becoming my wife would provide exactly the discipline she currently lacks." Obiora's jaw tightened visibly, though he remained outwardly composed, clearly aware of the delicate nature of their financial situation and the very real power Chief Okonkwo held over their family's future. "I appreciate your generous offer," he said carefully, choosing his words with obvious difficulty, "but I must discuss this matter with my family before providing any answer. Such an important decision cannot be made hastily." Chief Okonkwo studied him for a long moment, clearly displeased by the lack of immediate agreement, though he eventually nodded stiffly. "Very well. I will allow you 1 week to consider my proposal fully. However, understand clearly that if the debt remains unpaid, and my offer remains unanswered favorably, I will have no choice but to pursue more severe measures to recover what is rightfully owed to me." With that, Chief Okonkwo turned and departed, his servants following closely behind, leaving behind a heavy, uncomfortable silence within the small household. Adaeze turned to her father immediately, her earlier anxiety now transforming into genuine fear. "Father, surely you do not intend to consider such a proposal seriously?" Obiora sighed heavily, running a tired hand across his forehead. "My daughter, I wish desperately that there were another solution available to us. Our debt to Chief Okonkwo has grown far larger than I initially anticipated, largely due to the costs of my medical treatments these past 2 years. Without some way to repay this debt, I fear he may indeed pursue harsher measures, potentially seizing our home and remaining possessions entirely. There must be another way, Adazi insisted, her voice trembling slightly with barely controlled emotion. I cannot simply become his wife, father. Please, you must understand this. I do understand, my daughter, Obiora replied gently, though his expression remained heavy with worry. And I promise you, I will search for every possible alternative before considering his proposal seriously. But you must also understand our situation is genuinely difficult, and time is not something we currently have in abundance. That evening, the family gathered together in tense silence, the earlier confrontation weighing heavily upon each of them. Neka prepared dinner with visibly trembling hands, while young Chidi, sensing the seriousness of the situation despite his youth, remained unusually quiet throughout the meal. How much exactly do we owe him? Adaeze finally asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence that had settled over their small table. Obiora hesitated before answering, clearly reluctant to burden his daughter further with such troubling details. Nearly 40,000 in local currency, he admitted finally, an amount that has grown considerably due to the interest Chief Okonkwo has added over these past months. Adaeze felt her heart sink further at hearing the substantial sum, recognizing immediately that such an amount was far beyond what her family could realistically hope to gather within a single week. Is there truly no other way to raise such funds? She asked, desperation creeping into her voice. I have already considered every option available to me, Obiora replied wearily. I have no additional property to sell, no remaining valuables of significant worth, and my illness prevents me from taking on additional trading work quickly enough to raise such an amount within the time we have been given. The family fell into troubled silence once more, each member privately grappling with the weight of their difficult circumstances. Adaeze found herself unable to eat, her appetite entirely lost amid the overwhelming anxiety now consuming her thoughts. Later that night, unable to sleep once again, Adaeze found herself wandering quietly toward the family's small garden, seeking solitude to process the troubling events of the day. The moonlight illuminated the modest rows of vegetables her mother tended so carefully, and Adaeze sat down heavily upon a small wooden bench nearby, burying her face in her hands. She thought bitterly of her earlier pride, her sharp judgments of others based solely on outward appearances, and wondered now whether some greater lesson was being taught to her through these difficult circumstances. She thought too, unexpectedly, of the ragged stranger who had shown such quiet strength and dignity despite his humble appearance, wondering whether she might learn something valuable from his calm resilience during her own family's current struggles. As she sat lost in troubled thought, she became gradually aware of soft footsteps approaching from behind. Turning quickly, she was surprised to find her mother, Eneka, approaching quietly through the moonlit garden. I could not sleep either, Eneka admitted softly, settling down beside her daughter on the small bench. This situation weighs heavily upon all of us. I do not know what to do, mother, Adaeze confessed, her earlier composure finally breaking down entirely. I cannot bear the thought of becoming Chief Okonkwo's wife, yet I cannot bear the thought of losing our home either, nor causing further hardship for our family. Neka wrapped a comforting arm around her daughter's shoulders, holding her close, as tears finally began falling freely down Adaeze's cheeks. Your father and I will find some solution, my daughter. I promise you, we will not allow you to sacrifice your happiness and future simply to settle this debt. But how, mother? Adaeze asked desperately. We have so little time, and so few options available to us. Neka sighed deeply, her own worry evident, despite her attempts to remain strong for her daughter's sake. I do not know precisely how we shall manage, my daughter. But I have learned throughout my life that difficult circumstances often reveal unexpected solutions, sometimes through people or means we least expect. Adaeze found little comfort in her mother's words, though she appreciated the attempt at reassurance. She remained sitting quietly in the moonlit garden long after her mother had returned indoors, her mind occupied with troubling thoughts about her family's uncertain future, and, unexpectedly, thoughts of the calm, dignified stranger who had shown such quiet strength during his own difficult journey through their village. She wondered, staring up at the moonlit sky above, whether such calm strength might somehow be possible for her own family during these uncertain days ahead, or whether their difficult circumstances would ultimately overwhelm them entirely. forcing her into a future she desperately wished to avoid. As dawn slowly approached, Adaeze finally returned indoors, her body exhausted from lack of sleep, yet her mind still turbulent with anxiety and uncertainty. She knew, with heavy certainty, that the coming days would test her family's resilience and unity as never before, and she found herself desperately hoping that some unexpected solution might yet emerge to save them from the difficult choice looming ominously on their horizon. 2 days after Chief Okonkwo's unsettling visit, Adaeze found herself walking toward the village stream, a wooden basin balanced on her hip, filled with clothes that needed washing. The chore, ordinarily simple and unremarkable, now felt like a small mercy, an excuse to escape the tense atmosphere that had settled over her household since the wealthy chief's proposal. Her father had spent the previous 2 days visiting every trader and acquaintance he could think of, searching desperately for some way to raise the funds needed to settle their debt. Each visit, however, had ended in disappointment, as few in the village possessed such a large sum readily available, and those who did seemed reluctant to lend so generously, wary perhaps of Chief Okonkwo's influence and the risk of displeasing such a powerful man. As Adaeze knelt beside the stream, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on one of her father's shirts, she found her thoughts drifting once again to the ragged traveler and his calm, steady presence during their previous encounters. She wondered, not for the first time, where he had gone, and whether he remained still within the village or had continued his journey elsewhere. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps along the path leading to the stream. Looking up, she was startled to see the very stranger she had been thinking about, walking slowly toward the water's edge, his expression thoughtful, as though he too sought a moment of quiet solitude away from the village. He paused upon noticing her, offering a polite nod of acknowledgement, before settling down on a large stone, a respectful distance away, apparently intending to rest briefly by the stream himself. "You seem troubled," he observed, after a moment of comfortable silence had passed between them, his voice gentle but perceptive. Adaeze hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to someone she barely knew, yet something about his calm demeanor made her feel unexpectedly at ease. "My family faces some difficulties," she admitted finally, choosing her words carefully. "Financial troubles that threaten our home, and, perhaps, more than just our home." The stranger studied her thoughtfully, though he did not press for further details, allowing her the space to share as much or as little as she wished. "Difficulties often feel heaviest when carried alone," he said simply, "though I understand if you prefer not to speak further of private matters." Adaeze found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, wanting to share more. Perhaps it was his calm manner, or perhaps simply the weight of her worries finally seeking release. "My father owes a considerable debt to a powerful man in our village," she explained slowly. "A man who has proposed a solution I find deeply troubling." She did not elaborate further, her pride preventing her from revealing the full humiliation of Chief Okonkwo's proposal, yet the stranger seemed to sense the depth of her distress regardless. "Debts can create difficult circumstances," he said quietly, "especially when those holding power over such debts choose to exploit their advantage unfairly." Adaeze nodded, grateful that he seemed to understand, without requiring further explanation. They sat together in thoughtful silence for a while longer, the gentle sound of the stream providing a soothing backdrop to their quiet contemplation. "I hope," the stranger said eventually, rising slowly from his stone seat, "that your family finds a fair resolution to this difficulty." "As do I," Adaeze replied softly, watching as he offered a final polite nod, before continuing along the path away from the stream. She returned home later that afternoon, her basin of freshly washed clothes balanced carefully on her hip, her mind occupied with thoughts of the stranger's quiet understanding and gentle words of comfort. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the surprising news that awaited her upon her return. "Adaeze," her mother called out excitedly the moment she stepped through the gate, "come quickly. You will not believe what has happened." Confused by her mother's evident excitement, Adaeze hurried inside, finding her father seated at the table, staring down at a small leather pouch with an expression of stunned disbelief. "What has happened?" Adaeze asked, glancing between her parents with growing curiosity. Obiora looked up at his daughter, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and confusion. "A young boy delivered this pouch to our gate less than an hour ago. he explained slowly, claiming only that a traveler passing through the village had asked him to deliver it, with instructions that it should go directly to our family. He opened the pouch carefully, revealing a substantial amount of silver coins, more than enough, Adayeze realized with growing astonishment, to settle their entire debt to Chief Okonkwo. There must be some mistake, Adayeze said, staring at the pouch in disbelief. Why would a stranger provide such generosity to our family specifically? The boy said only that the traveler wished to remain anonymous, Obiora explained, still visibly stunned by the unexpected turn of events. He provided no further explanation, other than insisting the funds were meant specifically to settle our family's outstanding debt. Neka, who had been standing nearby, with tears of relief and confusion in her eyes, shook her head slowly. Who could possibly have known of our situation so precisely, and why would they choose to help us so generously, without seeking recognition or gratitude? Adayeze felt a strange, unexpected suspicion beginning to form within her mind, though she hesitated to voice it aloud immediately. She thought again of the ragged traveler's quiet understanding by the stream earlier that day, his gentle words of comfort regarding unfair debts and the exploitation of power. Could it possibly be him? She wondered silently. Yet the idea seemed almost too incredible to consider seriously. A ragged traveler, dressed in torn and dusty clothing, providing such a substantial sum of silver coins, seemed entirely implausible, regardless of the whispers and rumors that had circulated throughout the village regarding his mysterious true identity. Whoever this traveler is, Obiora said finally, his voice thick with emotion, we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. This generosity has quite possibly saved our family from an impossible situation. Adayeze remained quiet, her mind racing with unanswered questions and growing suspicion, though she chose not to share her private thoughts with her parents just yet, uncertain whether her suspicions held any true merit. That evening, as the family celebrated their unexpected relief with a modest but joyful dinner, Adayeze found herself unable to fully participate in the light-hearted conversation, her thoughts remaining preoccupied with the mysterious circumstances surrounding their sudden good fortune. Later that night, after her parents and brother had retired to their sleeping mats, Adayeze slipped quietly outside once more, drawn by an unexplainable urge to seek out the ragged traveler and confirm her growing suspicions directly. She walked slowly toward the village center, uncertain exactly where she might find him, yet hoping fate might guide her toward another unexpected encounter. As she approached the quiet village square, illuminated softly by scattered lantern light from nearby homes, she spotted a familiar figure sitting alone beneath a large tree, his posture relaxed yet thoughtful as he gazed up at the star-filled sky above. I thought I might find you here, Adayeze said softly, approaching cautiously. The stranger looked up, his expression calm but slightly surprised by her unexpected appearance. You seem to have sought me out deliberately, he observed quietly. Is something troubling you further? Adayeze hesitated, uncertain exactly how to phrase her suspicion, without appearing foolish or presumptuous. My family received an unexpected gift today, she said carefully, watching his reaction closely. A generous sum of silver coins, delivered anonymously, precisely enough to settle a difficult debt. The stranger's expression remained carefully neutral, though Adayeze thought she detected a subtle flicker of something within his calm eyes, something that hinted at recognition or quiet satisfaction. That is fortunate news indeed, he replied simply, offering no further explanation. Was it you? Adayeze asked directly, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Did you provide this generous gift to my family? The stranger studied her thoughtfully for a long moment before responding. Does it truly matter who provided such assistance? He asked gently, so long as your family's difficulty has been resolved fairly. His careful response neither confirmed nor denied her suspicion directly, yet something within his calm, knowing gaze convinced Adayeze that her instincts had been correct. It matters to me, she said softly, because I wish to properly express my gratitude, and because I confess, I am deeply curious about who you truly are, beneath this humble disguise. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the stranger's lips, though he remained silent for a long moment, clearly considering how best to respond to her direct question. Perhaps, he said finally, rising slowly to his feet, some truths reveal themselves naturally in time, without needing to be forced prematurely. For now, I would simply ask that you allow your family to enjoy this unexpected relief, without concerning yourself further with questions regarding its source." With that, he offered a polite nod of farewell, leaving Adaeze standing alone beneath the star-filled sky, her earlier suspicions now considerably strengthened, though her curiosity regarding his true identity remained frustratingly unsatisfied. She returned home slowly, her mind occupied entirely with thoughts of the mysterious stranger's calm wisdom, quiet generosity, and the increasingly undeniable sense that he was indeed someone far greater than his ragged appearance had originally suggested. As she settled finally onto her sleeping mat that night, Adaeze found herself reflecting deeply on her own earlier harshness and quick judgment, recognizing with uncomfortable clarity how mistaken she had been to dismiss him so coldly during their very first encounter at her family's gate. She resolved silently, as sleep finally began to claim her exhausted mind, that she would find some way to properly thank this mysterious traveler for his generosity, regardless of his evident reluctance to reveal his true identity, and that she would strive, moving forward, to judge others more carefully, based on their true character, rather than their outward appearance alone. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Umuoji, one whose arrival would set into motion the very revelation Adaeze had been quietly seeking for days. A merchant named Ekwueme, known throughout the region for his frequent travels between villages and cities, arrived at the market square with his usual collection of fine cloth, spices, and small treasures gathered from his many journeys. Adaeze had gone to the market that morning on her mother's request, seeking fresh vegetables for the family's midday meal, when she noticed an unusual commotion near Ekwueme's stall. A small crowd had gathered, and the merchant's voice carried excitedly above the general noise of the marketplace. "I tell you, I am certain of what I saw," Ekwueme was saying to a group of curious listeners, his hands gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "3 days ago, in the city of Adaora, I saw this very man, dressed in the finest robes, seated beside Duke Renshaw himself at a public gathering. I could not mistake his face, even now dressed in such humble clothing." Adaeze felt her heart skip suddenly as she registered the direction of the merchant's gaze, which had settled upon a familiar figure standing quietly at the edge of the gathered crowd. The ragged traveler stood there, his expression carefully composed, though Adaeze could detect a subtle tension in his posture that suggested he had not anticipated this particular encounter. "Surely you are mistaken," one villager said doubtfully, glancing skeptically between the merchant and the humble traveler. "This man has been living among us for over a week now, dressed as simply as any wandering beggar. How could he possibly be connected to the Duke's household?" "I know what I saw," Ekwueme insisted firmly, his confidence unwavering. "That is Alaric, son of Duke Renshaw, and heir to the entire territory, including our own village of Umuoji. I have seen him before, at official gatherings in the city, though admittedly he wore far grander clothing on those occasions." A wave of stunned murmurs swept through the gathered crowd, and Adaeze felt her own breath catch sharply in her chest, as the merchant's words confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. The ragged traveler, the humble stranger she had so harshly dismissed at her own family's gate, was none other than the future duke of their entire region. The stranger, recognizing that his careful disguise had finally been discovered beyond any reasonable doubt, remained remarkably composed, despite the growing attention now focused entirely upon him. He raised a hand gently, requesting quiet from the murmuring crowd, and the marketplace gradually fell into an expectant hush. "The merchant speaks the truth," he said finally, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority that had, in hindsight, always been present beneath his humble disguise. "I am indeed Alaric, son of Duke Renshaw, and I have walked among you these past days, disguised as a common traveler, hoping to learn the true character of this village and its people." The crowd's reaction was immediate and varied, ranging from disbelief to embarrassment, as many villagers began recalling their own interactions with the supposed beggar over the previous days, wondering nervously whether their words or actions had been appropriately respectful, given his true identity. Adaeze stood frozen amid the gathered crowd, her mind racing as she processed this stunning revelation. Every harsh word she had spoken at her family's gate, every dismissive glance and cruel remark, replayed itself vividly within her memory, each recollection now carrying the crushing weight of her earlier ignorance and unfair judgment. She felt a hot flush of shame spreading across her face as she recalled specifically her cold dismissal of him that very first morning, her insistence that he continue down the road rather than rest beneath their tree, her cruel suggestion that people might think poorly of her family for associating with beggars. Each memory now felt like a physical blow, striking deeply at her earlier pride and confidence. Alaric, for his part, addressed the crowd with practiced calm, explaining briefly his family's tradition of walking incognito among their people before officially assuming leadership responsibilities. He spoke diplomatically, careful not to embarrass any particular individual directly, though Adeyeze could not shake the uncomfortable feeling that his gaze occasionally shifted briefly toward her during his explanation, as though silently acknowledging their own particular history together. As the crowd slowly began dispersing, still buzzing with excited whispers and nervous speculation about their own previous interactions with the disguised nobleman, Adeyeze remained standing quietly near the edge of the market square, uncertain how to process the overwhelming mixture of emotions now flooding through her. She watched as several village elders approached Alaric respectfully, offering formal greetings and apologies for any perceived disrespect during his time among them. He accepted their apologies graciously, though his expression remained thoughtful, as though his mind remained partially occupied with matters beyond the immediate attention now surrounding him. Adeyeze considered approaching him directly, offering her own apology amid the gathered crowd, yet her earlier pride, though considerably diminished, still resisted such a public admission of her earlier cruelty. Instead, she turned quietly and made her way home, her basket of vegetables entirely forgotten amid the overwhelming shock of the day's revelation. Upon returning home, she found her parents already aware of the stunning news, having heard the rapidly spreading gossip from a neighbor who had rushed excitedly to share the discovery. "Can you believe it?" Naneka said, her voice still carrying evident astonishment. "The very traveler who visited our gate that first morning, the one you turned away so quickly, is truly the son of Duke Renshaw himself." Adeyeze nodded silently, unable to trust her own voice given the turbulent emotions still churning within her chest. Obiora studied his daughter carefully, noting her unusual silence and evident distress. "You seem deeply troubled, my daughter. Is something further concerning you regarding this revelation?" "I spoke to him so cruelly, father," Adeyeze finally admitted, her voice trembling slightly with genuine remorse. "That very first morning, I dismissed him harshly, worried only about our family's reputation, should villagers see us associating with someone who appeared to be a mere beggar. I cannot imagine what he must think of me now, knowing the truth of who he truly is." Her father's expression softened with understanding, recognizing the genuine distress evident in his daughter's voice. "You could not have known his true identity, my daughter. Many others in the village likely behaved similarly, unaware of the truth hidden beneath his humble disguise. But that does not excuse my cruelty," Adeyeze replied miserably. "Kindness should not depend upon knowing someone's true status or importance. Mother tried to teach me this very lesson that first morning, yet I dismissed her wisdom entirely, too prideful to consider that appearances might deceive." Neka moved closer, placing a comforting hand gently upon her daughter's shoulder. "Every person makes mistakes, born from pride or fear, my daughter. What matters now is how you choose to move forward from this experience. Perhaps this humbling lesson will serve you well throughout the remainder of your life." Adeyeze nodded slowly, though she remained deeply troubled by the situation, uncertain how she might properly address her earlier behavior towards someone of such significant status and importance. The thought of formally apologizing to the future duke, someone whose power and influence now seemed almost overwhelming compared to her own humble circumstances, filled her with considerable anxiety. Over the following days, the village of Umuoji remained abuzz with excitement and nervous speculation regarding Alaric's true identity and the implications of his extended stay among them. Many villagers, having learned of his careful observations regarding local governance and fairness, grew anxious about potential consequences for any perceived injustices he might have witnessed during his time in disguise. The local chief, in particular, appeared visibly nervous following the revelation, likely concerned about Alaric's earlier observations regarding delayed dispute resolutions within the village. Meanwhile, Chief Okonkwo, upon learning of Alaric's true identity, seemed notably absent from public gatherings, his earlier confidence and authority within the village considerably diminished by uncertainty regarding whether his own questionable business practices might have attracted the future duke's unfavorable attention. Adayeze, meanwhile, found herself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of how she might properly address her own earlier behavior toward Alaric. She recognized clearly that a formal apology was necessary, both for her own peace of mind and out of genuine respect for the wisdom and grace he had displayed throughout his time in their village, despite her own earlier unkindness toward him. Yet each time she considered approaching him directly, her nerves and lingering pride prevented her from taking definitive action, leaving her caught in an uncomfortable state of anxious hesitation. It was during this period of internal struggle that she learned, through village gossip once again, those never-ending whispers, that Alaric intended to conclude his time in Umuoji within the next few days, preparing to return officially to his family's palace and resume his responsibilities as heir to the dukedom. This news filled Adayeze with a sudden, urgent sense of anxiety, recognizing that her window of opportunity to properly address her earlier cruelty was rapidly closing. She realized, with growing clarity, that if she failed to act soon, she would likely lose any opportunity to express genuine remorse for her earlier harsh judgment, potentially leaving this uncomfortable chapter of her life forever unresolved. Determined finally to overcome her lingering pride and anxiety, Adayeze resolved that evening to seek out Alaric directly the following morning, regardless of the discomfort such a confrontation might bring. She spent that night restless and anxious, mentally rehearsing various ways she might properly express her genuine regret, uncertain how such an important and delicate conversation might ultimately unfold. As dawn finally broke the following morning, Adayeze rose early, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation, fully aware that the coming conversation would likely prove among the most significant and humbling experiences of her young life thus far. The morning air felt unusually cool as Adayeze stepped outside her family's home, her heart still pounding from a restless night filled with anxious thoughts and half-formed apologies. She had barely slept, rehearsing over and over the words she hoped might properly convey her genuine remorse, yet nothing she practiced felt entirely adequate for the weight of what she needed to say. She had learned from a neighbor the previous evening that Alaric had been staying in a small guest house near the edge of the village, a modest dwelling, usually reserved for traveling merchants or officials passing through Umuoji. It was there, she decided, that she would seek him out, before he could depart the village entirely and disappear back into the grand world of the palace, a world so distant from her own modest life that she could hardly imagine it. The walk to the guest house felt longer than usual, though in truth it was only a short distance from her home. Each step brought a fresh wave of nervousness, and she found herself rehearsing her words once more, wondering whether she should begin with an apology, or perhaps first express her gratitude for his generosity toward her family, or whether she should simply speak honestly and allow her words to come as they would. As she approached the modest guest house, she noticed a small cart being loaded nearby with a few simple belongings, and her heart sank slightly at the sight, fearing she had perhaps arrived too late, that he might already be preparing to depart entirely. Yet as she drew closer, she spotted him standing near the doorway, dressed still in his humble traveling clothes, though something about his posture now seemed different, more open, as though the need for careful disguise had finally lifted from his shoulders. He noticed her approach and paused, his expression unreadable, though not unkind. "Adayeze," he said simply, his voice carrying a quiet warmth she had not expected, given the circumstances of their history together. "I hoped I might speak with you before you departed," she said, her voice trembling slightly, despite her efforts to remain composed. "There is something I must say to you, something I should have said much sooner." Alaric studied her for a long moment, his expression patient and attentive, waiting for her to continue without pressing her further. Adayeze took a deep breath, gathering what remained of her courage. "I owe you a sincere apology," she began, her voice growing steadier as she spoke, though her cheeks burned with evident shame. "When you first came to our gate, tired and thirsty from your travels, I treated you with cruelty and disrespect. I judged you unfairly, based solely on your appearance, without any consideration for your true character or circumstances. I spoke to you as though you were beneath my concern, and I told you cruel things simply to protect my own family's reputation among our neighbors." She paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. "I did not know, of course, who you truly were, but that does not excuse my behavior. My mother tried to teach me that very morning that kindness should never depend upon someone's outward appearance or apparent status. Yet I dismissed her wisdom entirely, too prideful and quick to judge. I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you, and I wish to offer you my sincere and heartfelt apology, regardless of whether you choose to accept it. Alaric remained quiet for a long moment after she finished speaking, his expression thoughtful as he considered her words carefully. Adaize waited anxiously, uncertain what response she might receive, half expecting perhaps cold dismissal or quiet disappointment, given the significant gap that now existed between their respective stations in life. "I appreciate your honesty," he said finally, his voice gentle, but carrying a quiet seriousness that suggested he was giving her words the careful consideration they deserved. It takes considerable courage to acknowledge one's own mistakes so openly, particularly when circumstances might make such an admission uncomfortable or difficult. "Do you forgive me then?" Adaize asked, unable to fully contain the hopeful uncertainty in her voice. Alaric considered this question thoughtfully before responding. "Forgiveness is not something that requires great difficulty on my part," he said. "I encountered many reactions during my time traveling in disguise, some kind, some unkind, and I understood from the beginning that such was the nature of walking among people without the protection of my title. Your reaction, though certainly unkind, was not unique among those I encountered." He paused, studying her carefully. "What matters more to me, however, is not simply the apology itself, but what you choose to do with the lesson it has taught you. Will you carry this experience forward, allowing it to shape how you treat others in the future, or will this simply become a passing moment of discomfort, quickly forgotten, once the immediate embarrassment has faded?" Adaize considered his question seriously, recognizing the wisdom and depth behind his gentle challenge. "I hope," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that I will remember this lesson for the remainder of my life. I have already begun to see how mistaken I was, to judge others so quickly, based on their outward appearance alone. I witnessed your kindness toward Papa Emeka, your generosity toward my own family during our time of desperate need, and your patience even in the face of my own earlier cruelty. These experiences have taught me more about true character than any lecture from my mother ever could." A faint smile touched Alaric's lips at her sincere response. "That is a wise reflection," he said approvingly. "True character reveals itself not through wealth or appearance, but through actions and choices, particularly during moments when kindness or cruelty seem to carry little consequence." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, the earlier tension between them having eased considerably, following her heartfelt apology and his thoughtful response. "I must ask," Adaize said finally, curiosity overcoming her earlier nervousness, "why did you choose to help my family so generously, despite my earlier unkindness toward you? Surely you owed us nothing, particularly given how poorly I treated you at our very first meeting." Alaric considered this question for a moment before responding. "I witnessed the genuine distress within your family regarding Chief Okonkwo's unfair proposal," he explained. "I have long been aware, through various reports reaching my father's palace, of Chief Okonkwo's tendency to exploit those facing financial hardship, using debts as leverage to gain advantages he would not otherwise deserve. Your family's situation provided a clear example of exactly the kind of injustice my father has always sought to prevent within our territories. Then your generosity was not truly about our family specifically," Adaize said, somewhat surprised by this realization, "but rather about addressing broader unfairness within the village." "Both things can be true simultaneously," Alaric replied gently. "I was moved by your family's specific circumstances, yet also motivated by broader principles regarding fairness and justice that I hope to uphold once I officially assume my father's responsibilities. Helping your family addressed both concerns at once." Adaize nodded slowly, appreciating the thoughtful complexity behind his explanation. "Regardless of your reasoning," she said, "my family remains deeply grateful for your generosity. You have saved us from an impossible situation, one that threatened not only our home, but my own future happiness as well." "I am glad my assistance proved helpful," Alaric replied simply, though something in his expression suggested there was more he wished to say, though he seemed hesitant to continue further. Sensing his hesitation, Adaize studied him curiously. "Is there something else you wish to share?" she asked gently. Alaric hesitated a moment longer before responding. I confess, my initial journey through Umuoji was intended primarily to observe the fairness of local governance and the character of its people. However, I did not anticipate the particular circumstances that unfolded during my time here, nor the unexpected reflections these experiences have prompted within my own thoughts. What do you mean? Adaise asked, curiosity growing further at his uncharacteristically uncertain tone. I mean, Alaric said slowly, choosing his words with evident care, that I have found myself unexpectedly interested in understanding your own character more fully, beyond simply the circumstances of our initial meeting. Your willingness to defend Papa Emeka against those who mocked him, despite personal risk to yourself, and your evident growth and reflection following our subsequent encounters, have left a considerable impression upon me. Adaise felt her cheeks warming once again, though this time from a different kind of embarrassment entirely, one mixed with unexpected pleasure at his words. I do not know quite how to respond to such an admission, she said honestly, her voice softer than before. You need not respond immediately, Alaric said gently, offering her a reassuring smile. I simply wish to be honest with you, given the sincerity you yourself demonstrated in your own apology. Whatever may come of these particular feelings, I believe honesty between us is important, particularly given the unusual circumstances that first brought us together. Adaise nodded slowly, appreciating his openness, even as her own thoughts and emotions swirled with newfound uncertainty regarding what this conversation might ultimately mean for her own future. I must complete my preparations to return to the palace, Alaric said finally, glancing briefly toward the cart being loaded nearby. However, I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you further before my departure, if you are willing. I would like that as well, Adaise replied, surprising herself slightly with the genuine warmth evident in her own voice. Perhaps this evening then, Alaric suggested. Before I depart tomorrow morning, there is a quiet spot near the old baobab tree, along the village road, a place I have found peaceful during my time here. Would you be willing to meet me there, once your evening chores are completed? I will be there, Adaise promised, feeling a strange flutter of anticipation mixed with lingering uncertainty regarding what such a meeting might ultimately reveal. As she walked home that morning, her mind remained occupied with the unexpected turn their conversation had taken, moving well beyond her original intention of simply offering an apology. She found herself both nervous and curious about their planned evening meeting, uncertain exactly what Alaric intended to discuss further, yet strangely eager to learn more regardless of the uncertainty involved. Her family, upon her return, noticed her evidently distracted state throughout the remainder of the day, though she offered little explanation regarding her earlier conversation with Alaric, preferring instead to keep her own private thoughts and emotions closely guarded until she better understood their true significance herself. As evening finally approached, Adaise prepared herself carefully, her earlier nervousness returning tenfold as she made her way slowly toward the old baobab tree, uncertain exactly what conversation awaited her there, yet increasingly aware that whatever occurred during their upcoming meeting would likely prove significant in shaping her own future in ways she had not previously imagined. The evening sky had begun turning shades of orange and purple by the time Adaise reached the old baobab tree, its massive trunk and sprawling branches casting long shadows across the dusty road. She found Alaric already waiting there, seated calmly upon one of the tree's large exposed roots, gazing thoughtfully toward the horizon, where the sun continued its slow descent. He rose as she approached, offering a warm smile that eased some of the nervous tension she had carried with her throughout the walk. Thank you for coming, he said simply, gesturing toward a smooth section of route beside his own seat. Adaise settled down carefully, smoothing her wrapper as she gathered her thoughts. I confess, I have thought of little else since our conversation this morning, she admitted honestly. I am uncertain exactly what you wish to discuss further. Alaric was quiet for a moment, watching the skies changing colors before finally speaking. I wanted to speak with you honestly, away from the attention of the village, about what comes next, both for your family and, perhaps, for us. Us? Adaise repeated softly, her heart quickening slightly at the word. I must return to the palace tomorrow, Alaric continued. My father will expect a full account of my journey, and there is much work awaiting me as I prepare to eventually take on his responsibilities. But before I leave, I wanted to be clear about something important. He turned to face her directly, his expression earnest. I do not make this offer lightly, nor do I make it out of pity or obligation because of your family's earlier hardship. I have watched you these past days, Adeze. I have seen your pride, yes, but I have also seen your courage in defending Papa Emeka, your honesty in offering your apology, and your willingness to reflect honestly upon your own mistakes. These are rare qualities, and they matter far more to me than the manners you display towards someone you believe to be beneath you. Adeze felt her breath catch slightly, uncertain where his words were leading, though a part of her had already begun to guess. When I left the palace, Alaric continued, I told my father I hoped to find someone who would treat me with kindness because of who I truly am, not because of my title or my wealth. I did not expect to find such a lesson through hardship and correction, rather than immediate kindness. Yet perhaps that makes it more meaningful. You showed me cruelty at first, yes, but you also showed me growth, humility, and genuine change. That is not something many people, noble or common, manage to demonstrate so honestly. What are you saying exactly? Adeze asked quietly, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning correctly. I am saying, Alaric said gently, that I would like permission to court you properly, in the manner befitting your family's dignity and my own position, once matters at the palace are settled. I do not ask for an answer tonight. I understand this is sudden, and that my true identity changes things in ways that may feel overwhelming. But I wished you to know my intentions honestly before I departed, rather than leaving you uncertain or confused about what these past days have meant. Adeze sat in stunned silence for a long moment, her mind racing through a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, hope, uncertainty, and something warmer she was hesitant to name too quickly. I do not know what to say, she admitted finally. Only days ago, I dismissed you as a beggar at my gate. Now you speak of courtship, as though I were somehow deserving of such consideration despite my earlier behavior. Everyone deserves the chance to grow beyond their earlier mistakes, Alaric replied gently. I do not hold your first reaction against you forever, particularly given how sincerely you have since reflected upon it. What matters to me is not who you were in that single moment, but who you have shown yourself capable of becoming since. Adeze considered his words carefully, feeling the weight of the decision before her. She thought of her family's recent hardship, now resolved through his quiet generosity. She thought of her own pride, and how thoroughly this journey had humbled her over the past several days. She thought, too, of the calm strength and quiet wisdom she had witnessed in him repeatedly, qualities that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with his true character. I would like time to consider this properly, she said finally, choosing honesty over hasty agreement, not because I doubt your sincerity, but because such a decision deserves careful thought, and because I wish to be certain my own feelings are genuine, rather than simply a reaction to gratitude or surprise. Alaric nodded, clearly pleased rather than disappointed by her thoughtful response. That is exactly the kind of careful consideration I would hope for, he said warmly. I would not wish for you to agree hastily, only to regret such a decision later. Take whatever time you need. How will such a courtship even work? Adeze asked, practical concerns beginning to surface amid her swirling emotions, given the distance between the palace and our village, and the difference in our stations. My father has agreed to certain accommodations, Alaric explained. I will send correspondence regularly, and I intend to visit Umuoji periodically, as my responsibilities allow. Additionally, should our courtship progress favorably, I would ensure your family is properly supported, and that you receive whatever education or preparation might be helpful in adjusting to life within the palace, should that eventually become your path. Adeze absorbed this information slowly, recognizing the significant changes such a path would bring to her entire life, changes both exciting and, admittedly, somewhat frightening, given how dramatically different palace life would likely be from her humble upbringing in Umuoji. My family, she said suddenly, a new worry occurring to her. What of them? I could not simply abandon them for a grand new life while they remain here in the village. Your family need not be abandoned, Alaric assured her quickly. Should our courtship eventually lead to marriage, your family would be welcomed and honored appropriately, not forgotten or left behind. My own mother, before her passing, often spoke of the importance of remembering one's origins, regardless of how far one's life journey might eventually lead. I do not intend to forget that wisdom. Adeze felt a measure of relief at this reassurance. grateful that Alaric seemed to understand and respect the importance of family bonds, rather than viewing her humble origins as something to be hidden or discarded entirely. They sat together quietly for a while longer, watching as the last remaining light faded gradually from the sky, replaced slowly by the emerging brightness of stars overhead. The comfortable silence between them felt different now, charged with new possibility and cautious hope rather than the earlier tension of unresolved history. "I should return home," Adaize said eventually, though a part of her felt reluctant to end their conversation so soon. "My family will wonder where I have gone, particularly given how distracted I have been throughout today." "Of course," Alaric replied, rising to help her up from the tree root where they had been seated. "I depart early tomorrow morning, but I wished for us to have this conversation before then, regardless of what you ultimately decide." "Thank you," Adaize said sincerely, "for your patience and for your honesty, both today and throughout your time here, despite my earlier unkindness." Alaric smiled gently. "Thank you for your own honesty as well, both in your apology and in your thoughtful response tonight. I will await whatever answer you eventually decide upon, without pressure or expectation." As they parted ways near the old baobab tree, Adaize walking slowly back toward her family's home, while Alaric returned toward the guest house, where his cart awaited final preparations for tomorrow's departure, she found her mind occupied entirely with the weight and possibility of what their conversation had revealed. She thought of her earlier pride, now humbled considerably through the events of the past week. She thought of her family's hardship, unexpectedly resolved through quiet generosity she had not anticipated. She thought, most of all, of Alaric himself, a man who had shown her, through patient example rather than harsh lecture, that true character mattered far more than outward appearance or immediate reputation. Upon returning home, she found her parents waiting anxiously, curious about her prolonged absence and the evident change in her demeanor since that morning. "Adaize," her mother said gently, noting her daughter's thoughtful, somewhat overwhelmed expression. "What has happened? You seem deeply affected by something." Adaize considered how much to share, uncertain whether she was yet ready to discuss such significant matters openly, even with her own parents. "Alaric has offered to court me properly," she said finally, deciding that honesty was best given the significance of the decision before her. "He departs tomorrow morning, but wished to share his intentions honestly before leaving." Her parents exchanged a look of stunned surprise, clearly not having anticipated such a significant development. "And what did you tell him?" Obiora asked carefully, studying his daughter's expression for any indication of her true feelings on the matter. "I told him I needed time to consider such an important decision properly," Adaize replied. "This is not a choice I wish to make hastily, regardless of the opportunities it might present." Neka nodded approvingly at her daughter's careful, thoughtful response. "That is wise, my daughter. Such a decision would change your entire life considerably and deserves careful reflection rather than hasty excitement, regardless of how remarkable the opportunity might seem." That night, as Adaize finally settled onto her sleeping mat, her mind remained occupied with thoughts of the significant decision now before her, weighing carefully the opportunities and challenges such a courtship might bring, while also reflecting deeply on the remarkable journey of humility and growth that had led her to this unexpected crossroads in her young life. 3 months passed since Alaric's departure from Umuoji, months during which Adaize found herself transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. That first morning, when she had cruelly dismissed a ragged stranger from her family's gate. True to his word, Alaric had maintained regular correspondence, sending letters through trusted messengers that arrived every few weeks, each one filled with news of his responsibilities at the palace, alongside gentle inquiries about her own life and thoughts. Adaize had used this time thoughtfully, reflecting deeply on the lessons her unexpected encounter with the disguised Duke had taught her. She found herself treating others with newfound consideration, whether they were wealthy traders passing through the village or humble farmers struggling with their daily burdens. The sharp tongue that had once been her defining characteristic had softened considerably, replaced by a thoughtfulness that surprised even those who had known her for many years. Her family's circumstances had improved steadily as well. With their debt to Chief Okonkwo fully settled, her father's health had begun improving gradually. No longer burdened by the constant stress of their financial troubles, the wealthy chief himself had grown notably quieter within the village. evidently cautious about his own business practices, now that word had spread of the future duke's earlier observations regarding fairness and justice throughout the region. It was on a warm afternoon in early autumn that word reached Umuoji of Alaric's impending return, this time not as a ragged traveler in humble disguise, but as the son of Duke Renshaw, arriving with proper ceremony and recognition befitting his true station. The entire village buzzed with excitement and anticipation, villagers scrambling to prepare their homes and their manners for such an important visit. Adaize found herself nervous in an entirely different way than during their previous encounters, uncertain how their relationship might change now that pretense and disguise no longer stood between them. She had spent the preceding 3 months corresponding thoughtfully with Alaric, sharing her own growth and reflections, while learning more about his responsibilities and the genuine care he held for the people under his family's protection. On the day of his arrival, the village gathered near the main road, watching as a modest procession approached, considerably less grand than might have been expected for someone of his position, yet clearly marking him as someone of significant importance. Alaric rode at the front, dressed now in fine clothing, befitting his true station, though his expression remained as calm and thoughtful as it had been during his time in disguise. He dismounted near the village square, greeting the assembled elders and officials with genuine warmth and respect, asking after the well-being of those he had come to know during his earlier stay. Adaize watched from a respectful distance, her heart pounding, with a mixture of anticipation and lingering nervousness, uncertain exactly how their reunion would unfold amid such public attention. Eventually, having completed his formal greetings with village leadership, Alaric's gaze found her within the gathered crowd, and his expression softened into a warm smile that immediately eased much of her earlier anxiety. He made his way through the crowd toward her, and though many eyes followed his movement curiously, he seemed entirely unconcerned with the attention his approach was generating. "Adaize," he said warmly, stopping before her with evident pleasure. "You look well. Your letters suggested as much, but it is good to see it confirmed in person." "As do you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy despite their months of thoughtful correspondence. "Though I confess, seeing you dressed so differently from our previous meetings takes some adjustment." Alaric laughed gently, a sound Adaize realized she had missed during his months away. "I imagine it does, though I hope the man beneath these fine clothes remains the same person you came to know during my time in disguise." "I have come to believe that," Adaize said sincerely, "particularly through your letters these past months. Your character has remained consistent, regardless of your outward appearance." They spoke for a while longer amid the gathered crowd, though eventually Alaric requested a private audience with her family, explaining that he wished to discuss important matters properly, with appropriate respect for tradition and her parents' blessing. That evening, within the modest comfort of Adaize's family home, Alaric sat formally across from Obiora and Nneka, his manner respectful and earnest, despite his elevated position. "I have come," he explained, "not only to fulfill my father's official duties within this region, but also to formally request your blessing regarding my continued courtship of your daughter, with the eventual intention of marriage, should she remain willing." Obiora and Nneka exchanged a glance filled with a mixture of pride, surprise, and quiet joy. "Our daughter has spoken highly of your character throughout these months," Obiora said carefully, "and we have witnessed for ourselves her own growth and reflection following your time here in Umuoji. If this is truly her wish, then you have our blessing wholeheartedly." Adaize, seated quietly nearby, felt her heart swell with gratitude and happiness at her parents' evident support. When Alaric turned to her, his expression hopeful yet patient, she found herself answering without hesitation. "It is truly my wish," she said softly, meeting his gaze steadily. "These past months have only strengthened what I began to feel during your time here, disguised though you were. I have seen your character clearly, both then and now, and I find myself deeply honored by your continued interest." The following months brought considerable change to Adaize's life, as she gradually transitioned into her new role, learning the customs and responsibilities expected of someone who would eventually become Duchess alongside Alaric. Yet throughout this transformation, she remained careful never to forget the humbling lesson that had first brought them together, nor the family and community that had shaped her earlier years in Umuoji. Their wedding, when it finally occurred nearly a year after Alaric's initial ragged appearance at her family's gate, was celebrated both within the grand halls of the palace and, at Adese's specific request, with a smaller, more intimate gathering held within Umuoji itself, honoring the village and community where their unlikely story had first begun. Standing before the gathered guests during this village celebration, Adese found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had led her to this moment. She thought of her earlier pride, her sharp judgment of a ragged stranger she had believed unworthy of even basic kindness. She thought of the humbling lessons that had followed, each encounter gradually reshaping her understanding of true character and worth. "I want to share something important," she said during the celebration, addressing the gathered villagers who had known her throughout her entire life. "A year ago, I turned away a tired traveler from my family's gate, judging him unworthy of even a simple cup of water, based solely on his ragged appearance. I did not know then that this same traveler would become my husband, nor that his patient example would teach me perhaps the most important lesson of my life." She paused, glancing warmly toward Alaric, who watched her with evident pride and affection. "True worth, I have learned, cannot be measured by wealth, status, or outward appearance. It is revealed instead through patience, kindness, and quiet strength, even when circumstances make such qualities difficult to maintain. I am deeply grateful for the humbling lesson this experience taught me, and I hope, moving forward, to treat every person I encounter with the respect and kindness they deserve, regardless of how they may appear." The gathered crowd, many of whom remembered clearly the whispered gossip and stunned revelation surrounding Alaric's true identity months earlier, listened with evident appreciation for her honest reflection and evident growth throughout their unlikely courtship. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Adese found herself standing quietly beside Alaric, near the very gate where their story had first begun, the same gate where she had once cruelly dismissed him without a second thought. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "about how differently our story might have unfolded, had I remained as prideful and quick to judge as I once was?" Alaric considered her question thoughtfully before responding. "I believe true character, once revealed, tends to find its proper path eventually," he said gently. "Your willingness to reflect honestly upon your mistakes, and your courage in offering genuine apology, revealed exactly the qualities I had hoped to find during my journey. I do not believe our story could have unfolded any other way, given who you truly are beneath your earlier pride." Adese smiled softly, leaning gently against her husband as they watched the stars beginning to emerge above the familiar village that had shaped her entire life. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "this humbling lesson was exactly what I needed, delivered in exactly the way it needed to arrive." And so, beneath the same starlit sky that had witnessed her earlier cruelty and her subsequent growth, Adese found herself grateful, finally and completely, for the ragged stranger who had once stood patiently at her gate, teaching her through quiet example that true worth is never measured by outward appearance, but revealed instead through the genuine character hidden within.